The lamp's warm hum filled my condo as I scrolled and saw my son celebrating a family milestone I was never told about. Still, I kept my fingers steady on the screen, letting the lamp's soft vibration hold me in place. As that low hum deepened, it seemed to echo every time I'd swallowed disrespect just to keep the peace. While it buzzed against the silence, I realized the betrayal hadn't started today. It had only finally shown its face. The same gentle hum reminded me I didn't need their permission to reclaim my life. That's when I whispered my verdict. The quietest justice is choosing myself. Before the story begins, tell me, where are you watching from? I hope your day's gentle and calm. Please like, subscribe, and let's start our story together. Hank Lawson woke before the alarm, the same way he had for most of his 69 years. Habit did that to a man decades of early mornings as a high school principal, walking halls before students poured in. Now retirement meant slower days, but his body never learned the new schedule. He padded into the kitchen, the quiet hum of the refrigerator greeting him like an old friend. Outside, late summer sunlight crept over the rooftops, washing golden light across his small, well-kept backyard. He brewed coffee the way his late wife used to, 2 scoops, a pinch extra, and sat at the table, feeling the stillness settle around him. Sundays were peaceful, uneventful, almost sacred. He didn't know that peace was about to shatter with the flick of a thumb. He unlocked his phone, opened Instagram out of muscle memory, and began the slow morning scroll. A photo filled his screen so suddenly, so brightly, that he stopped breathing for a second. Ryan, his son, standing in a tux, arm around a woman in a white gown. Chloe. They were smiling, no, glowing, in front of an arch covered in white roses. For a moment Hank stared, waiting for the caption to say engagement shoot or styled photo shoot or anything that didn't mean what it clearly did. But the words sat there, crisp and unmistakable. Best day of our lives. His thumb hovered. He swallowed hard and another post slid onto the screen. A group shot, laughing guests, Chloe's parents, a seaside backdrop that looked like somewhere expensive. Another video, vows exchanged under sunset light. A carousel of travel photos, champagne toasts, handwritten place cards. The kind of wedding you plan, coordinate, and celebrate with your closest people. Not a single face looked familiar. Not a single moment included him. Hank set his coffee down before he dropped it. He tried to breathe steadily, but something inside him sank like a stone tossed into deep water. Thoughts scattered in his head. Was I supposed to know? Did he tell Jenna? Did he mean to tell me later? Was this an accident? But the truth sat right in front of him on the glowing screen. Everyone important enough to be invited was there. And he was. He typed slowly, carefully, almost politely. Congratulations, son. Wishing you both a happy life together. His hands trembled enough that he had to correct the spelling twice. The message looked small, tiny, even beneath the glossy perfection of the photos. He hit send anyway. Not even 30 seconds passed before his phone rang. Jenna, his daughter's voice came through sharp with disbelief and anger. Dad, what the hell? When were you going to tell me? Did he seriously get married without us? Hank tried to steady his voice, tried to be the calm one, the buffer between the siblings like he had always been. It's fine, Jen. Maybe it was last minute. Maybe they planned something small. He didn't believe himself, but he said it anyway. Because if he didn't hold the line, if he let the hurt leak out, he wasn't sure he could get it under control again. Jenna didn't buy it. Dad, this isn't fine. You're shaking. I can hear it. But he kept insisting, repeating that same thin reassurance, I'm fine, until she sighed, frustrated and protective. She promised to come by later, but he told her no, not today. He needed space to think, even if thinking was the last thing he wanted to do. The house felt too quiet after she hung up. Afternoon sun stretched long across the living room, landing on the old armchair by the window, his wife's favorite spot. Hank lowered himself into it, feeling the familiar dip in the cushion. The silence pressed against him, thick and uneasy. He stared out at the yard they had tended together, the place where Ryan once ran barefoot through sprinklers, where birthday parties were held, where scraped knees were patched and scraped feelings even more so. When had that little boy grown into a man who saw his father as optional? When had Hank stopped being part of his life? He replayed the years in his mind, holidays skipped, calls that got shorter, conversations that felt performative. He brushed it all away then, telling himself Ryan was busy, that adulthood explained everything. But now the truth slashed clean. Through denial, somewhere along the line he had become part of the past, not the present. Evening settled in with a soft, bluish glow. The house stayed still as if waiting for him to break, but Hank didn't. He inhaled slowly, exhaled even slower. Hurt, yes, shocked, undeniably, but he would not let anger dictate the next step. Not today. He wouldn't call Ryan demanding answers, wouldn't create a scene in the middle of their celebration. Whether or not he'd been invited, it was their wedding day, and he wouldn't taint it. So he whispered to the empty room, let him enjoy it. Tonight isn't the night. But as the light faded, Hank knew something inside him had shifted, quietly but permanently. Something he couldn't yet name, something that wouldn't stay silent for long. The reply came long after sunset, long after Hank had convinced himself that maybe Ryan wouldn't respond at all. His phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, the sound sharp in the otherwise still house. He walked over slowly, almost hesitant to look, some part of him hoping for a voice message, maybe even an apology, some flicker of the old Ryan who used to call him after every big milestone. But the screen showed only a short text. Thanks, Dad, it was last minute. Nothing else. No explanation, no warmth, no acknowledgement of the obvious wound, just 7 words that felt like they were written by a stranger. Hank stood there for a long moment, thumb resting against the counter edge, the silence stretching thin around him. Last minute. Weddings did not happen last minute. Flights, venues, photographers, none of that just materialized overnight. The lie wasn't even well constructed. It was simply convenient. Before he could set the phone down, another notification chimed. Instagram. Chloe had posted again, a slow-motion montage of her tossing a bouquet, guests laughing, sunlight glinting off champagne glasses. At the end, white text floated onto the video. A perfect day, surrounded by everyone who matters. The words hit harder than Ryan's text. They were clean and elegant, wrapped in soft filters and delicate music, but the message underneath carved straight into him. Everyone who matters. The footage panned across smiling faces, Chloe's family, her friends, even coworkers Hank had never met. People who apparently mattered more than the man who raised the groom. His chest tightened, like someone had pulled a strap around his ribs and cinched it. He closed the app before the music could finish, setting the phone face down on the table. He didn't want to see any more. Didn't want algorithmic cheerfulness shoved in his face. Didn't want to keep feeling like an outsider to a life he once believed he was building with his son. There was a knock on the door not long after. When he opened it, Martha stood on the porch holding a grocery bag and wearing the expression of someone who'd already heard the news. She stepped inside without waiting for him to invite her, setting the bag on the counter. "Made a pie," she said simply. "Figured you shouldn't be alone today." Hank managed a faint smile, grateful even though his voice felt thin. They sat at the table, the same place he had read those wedding captions just hours earlier. He told her everything, the posts, the text, the absence of any explanation. Martha didn't interrupt. She just listened, hands folded, eyes steady on him the way only a long-time friend knows how to do. When he finished, she exhaled a long, slow breath. "Hank, being kind doesn't mean letting people erase you." Her tone wasn't sharp, but firm, grounding. "You've spent years giving Ryan space to figure out his life, but space isn't the same as permission to treat you like you're optional." He looked away, ashamed of how much the truth stung. "I didn't want to push him," he murmured. "Didn't want to lose him." Martha reached across the table, her hand briefly touching his wrist. "Honey, I think you already lost parts of him, and you didn't do a thing to deserve that." The words settled heavily but also honestly. There was no sugar-coating, no comforting lie, just recognition of a reality he'd been avoiding. After she left, the house felt even quieter than before, like someone had turned the volume down on the world. He couldn't stay inside anymore. The walls felt too tight, so he slipped on his jacket and stepped out into the cool evening air. The neighborhood was calm, porch lights glowing, kids' bikes leaning against fences. As he walked, he passed homes he'd known for decades, houses with family photos in the windows, front yards decorated with chalk drawings, wind chimes softly ringing. Signs of lives stitched together with laughter, arguments, shared meals, small traditions. Signs of families who still chose each other. He wondered when the choosing had stopped in his own. The sidewalk curved toward a cul-de-sac, and he paused, looking at a yard where a family had pinned up pictures from a recent graduation. Smiling parents, proud gra. ND parents, the whole clan wrapped around a teenager in a blue cap. A normal moment. A moment that used to include him and Ryan. By the time he returned home, night had fully settled in. The living room light cast a soft pool across the hardwood floor, and the house looked exactly as it always had. But something inside him felt different, unsettled, shifting, like invisible gears turning in a direction he didn't yet understand. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was something colder, something forming quietly in the dark, waiting for what came next. The days that followed moved slowly, each one blurring into the next, marked only by the quiet routines Hank had followed for years. Morning coffee, afternoon yard check, evening news. But now, under all of it, a low hum of unease lived in his chest, an ache that didn't lighten, not even with time. What made it worse wasn't the wedding itself. It was the silence, the deliberate, echoing silence from his own son. Every morning, Hank picked up his phone just hoping for a missed call, a text, even a short apology, something that proved Ryan still saw him. But the only updates came through Instagram notifications. Photos of turquoise beaches, lavish dinners, Chloe posing in perfectly curated outfits beside infinity pools. Ryan was in the background of some shots, smiling, relaxed, living a life that looked untouched by guilt. Not once did he look like a man who had just excluded his father from the biggest moment of his life. Finally, on the third morning, Hank gave in to the knot twisting in his stomach. He sat on the edge of his bed and called Ryan. The phone rang 3 times before going to voicemail. Hank hesitated, then forced himself to speak with warmth, not hurt. "Hey son, just calling to say hi, hope the trip's going well. Give me a call when you get a minute." He kept it short, steady, gentle. It was the kind of message he'd been leaving since Ryan was a teenager, calm, patient, leaving the door open. He hung up with a small sigh and set the phone down, telling himself Ryan would call back soon. He didn't. Another day passed, then another, still nothing. Hank told himself that the honeymoon must be busy, that maybe service was spotty, that maybe Ryan would call once he was home. But deep down, deep enough that he didn't want to touch the thought, he knew the truth. Ryan wasn't calling because he didn't feel the need to. Jenna arrived on Thursday afternoon, knocking hard enough that Hank knew she wasn't in a good mood. She stepped inside, dropped her keys on the counter, and crossed her arms in a way that made her look like the younger version of her mother. Determined, fiery, unwilling to let something slide just because it was easier. "Dad," she said, "have you heard from him yet?" Hank shook his head, trying to soften the blow with a shrug. "They're on a trip. I'm sure he'll call once they're settled." Jenna stared at him like he'd spoken another language. "Dad, he got married without us. He's posting pictures every 2 hours. He's not too busy. He's avoiding accountability and you're letting him." He exhaled, tired. "Jen, I don't want to make this bigger than it needs to be." "It is big," she snapped, but her voice cracked around the edges. "You raised him. You gave him everything. And he's treating you like you're some distant relative he can ignore." Hank rubbed his palms together slowly, trying to find the words. "After your mother passed, I didn't know how to handle him. He was hurting. I was hurting. And every time I tried to push a boundary, it felt like he took another step away. I was terrified of losing him altogether. So I tried being patient, tried being supportive." "And now?" Jenna asked quietly. He looked at her, eyes tired. Now I think maybe all that patience just taught him I'd accept anything. Jenna softened, stepping closer. Dad, patience is good, but this is permission. You're letting him decide how much of a father you're allowed to be. The words hit him hard, too true to ignore, too painful to accept easily. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the kitchen window. I didn't want to burden him, he murmured. Didn't want to be the father who guilted him into calls or visits. He's your son, Jenna said. Not a stranger you're scared to inconvenience. Later that evening, after Jenna left with a long, emotional hug, Hank stepped outside to water the plants near the porch. That's when he heard them, two neighbors talking across the street, voices drifting just clearly enough through the warm air. Did you see those wedding pictures? Beautiful ceremony. Yeah, surprised Hank wasn't there, though. I thought he was close with Ryan. Me too, maybe something happened. The words landed like pebbles thrown at the surface of a lake small, but each one rippling wider and deeper than the last. Hank stood still, hose dripping onto the concrete, listening without wanting to. He suddenly felt exposed, as if the whole street could the fracture in his family. As if the silence between him and his son wasn't just private anymore, it was visible. He went back inside and closed the door quietly, almost carefully, as though the house could sense the tension too. The sun had set completely now, leaving the rooms washed in muted shadows. Hank walked slowly down the hallway to the old wooden cabinet where they kept the family albums. He pulled out the top one and set it on the dining table. He flipped through the pages. Ryan at 5 with frosting on his face. Ryan at 12 holding a baseball bat too big for him. Ryan at 17 in his graduation robe, standing between his parents with a grin that lit up the photo. Hank traced the edge of that smile with his thumb. Somewhere along the way, he realized those pages had stopped telling the full story. The recent years were thin, almost blank, and the wedding, the moment that should have filled an entire chapter, wasn't there at all, not even in memory. He closed the album slowly, feeling a hollow weight settle in his chest. It wasn't just absence now, it was erasure. And as he sat alone at the table, the silence from his son felt less like distance and more like a door quietly closing. The next Monday morning, Hank was trimming the hedges when Calvin Brooks slowed his walk and stopped at the edge of the driveway. Calvin was one of the few people who had known Hank before the gray hair, before the retirement, before the grief. He leaned on his cane, brow furrowed in that familiar way that meant he had something he wasn't sure how to say. "You got a minute?" Calvin asked. Hank turned off the trimmer and wiped his hands on his jeans. "Sure, everything okay?" Calvin hesitated, shifting his weight. "I don't know if this is my place, Hank, but I saw something online." That alone was unusual. Calvin barely used the internet, let alone social media. Chloe, she was talking in some video, mentioning a Colorado event. At Ryan's childhood home. Sounded like she was planning something big. Hank blinked. "At my house." His voice cracked slightly, too thin, like it hadn't braced for another hit. Calvin nodded slowly. She sounded pretty certain. After Calvin left, Hank leaned against the porch railing, the wood warm under the sun. The idea rolled around in his mind, heavy, bewildering, strangely unsurprising. He went inside, grabbed his phone, and opened Instagram again, dread curling low in his stomach. It didn't take long to find it. Chloe's newest post, a sepia-toned picture of mountains, her caption flowing in airy script. Thinking about hosting a Colorado reception soon, something intimate to honor Ryan's roots. Roots, as if the place existed for her content, as if it were an aesthetic choice rather than the home where Hank and his wife built a life, raised children, weathered storms, and carved out something that mattered. He clicked the comments, expecting a few likes, maybe heart emojis. Instead, a flood of strangers chimed in, admiring the house, praising the idea, speaking as if the property already belonged to the newlyweds. "His childhood home is adorable. That backyard looks perfect for a party. You guys should renovate it once you move in." Hank felt something inside him pull tight. None of these people had ever stepped foot in his yard. None had walked those halls, lived those memories. Yet they spoke like it was already theirs to shape. He scrolled further, finding older posts he hadn't noticed before. Chloe posing on a stylish patio in Lowe's Angels, captioned, "Can't wait to mix modern style with the coziness of Ryan's family home someday." A vision of ownership, public, casual, assumed. And then almost painfully he remembered Ryan's own words over the years. Offhand comments about updating the place someday, or fixing it up when it's my turn. At the time, Hank had brushed them off as future daydreaming. But seeing Chloe's post, seeing the shared confidence between them, the realization hit hard. They already saw the house as theirs. Not someday. Not eventually. Now, they were planning a life around it, photographing it in their minds, slotting it into their timeline, without ever asking the man who lived in it. His breathing went shallow. How many decisions had they made about his home without him? How many conversations? How many assumptions built quietly behind his back? He felt, for the first time, not just ignored, but used, taken for granted in a way so complete it almost felt intentional. Jenna arrived later that afternoon with iced coffee and that look she wore when she sensed something was wrong before she even heard the details. Hank handed her the phone and let her scroll through the posts herself. Her expression shifted from disbelief to anger almost instantly. "You've got to be kidding me," she muttered. "They're talking about this house like it's a party venue, like it's already in their name." Hank sat down heavily in the armchair. "Maybe they just assume I woe and need it forever." Jenna turned to him sharply. "Dad, stop. This house is yours. You paid for it. You kept it running. You maintained every inch of it. Ryan isn't entitled to it just because he was born here." He rubbed his forehead. "I kept it for him, for both of you, for the memories. I didn't want to tear apart what your mother built." Jenna softened, but her voice stayed firm. "Mom didn't build this house so you could feel trapped inside it, and she definitely didn't build it so Ryan and Chloe could treat it like a prop." She sat beside him. "This home isn't a prize. It isn't an inheritance he's owed. It's yours, and if they've forgotten that, that's on them." Those words lingered long after she left. As the evening settled, Hank found himself on the porch again. The sky was turning that quiet shade of blue that only happened in late summer, when the light lingered but the warmth was fading. He looked at the yard, the rose bushes he and his wife planted, the fence he repaired more times than he could count, the creaking porch swing where Ryan once fell asleep as a toddler. He realized with a slow and painful clarity that the reason he never left this house wasn't love. It was guilt. Guilt about moving on. Guilt about outliving the woman he loved. Guilt about disappointing his son, who he'd always tried to keep close but who kept drifting further away. And now that guilt had turned into a chain, one he wasn't sure he wanted to keep wearing. As the last light faded, Hank exhaled, feeling a shift deep inside. Subtle, quiet, but real. Something was changing, and for the first time, he wasn't sure the house was worth holding onto anymore. Hank was sweeping pine needles off the front steps when he saw Derek Miles standing at the edge of the walkway, hands shoved deep in his pockets, shoulders pulled tight like he was bracing for cold weather that hadn't arrived. Derek usually carried himself with the easy confidence of a man who'd lived in the same town his whole life, but today he looked uncomfortable, almost guilty. Hank straightened, leaning the broom against the railing. "Morning, Derek," Hank said, forcing a small smile. Derek gave a stiff nod. "Hey, Hank, you got a minute?" There was something in his tone, hesitation wrapped in unease. Hank nodded and invited him inside. They ended up in the kitchen, the same kitchen where Hank had watched wedding photos flash across his phone just days before. Derek sat down slowly, tapping his fingers against his coffee mug. He cleared his throat once, then again. "Listen," he finally began, I just wanted to say I'm sorry about the wedding." He couldn't quite meet Hank's eyes. I thought maybe you chose not to go, but then I talked to Jenna and well, I figured out what really happened. Hank felt the familiar sting, but he stayed quiet. What was there left to say? He wasn't about to make Derek feel worse. Derek exhaled. I should have realized something was off. Ryan always talked about you at school, never thought he'd do something like that. Hank took a slow sip of coffee. People change, he murmured. Or maybe they don't. Maybe we just finally see who they are. Derek nodded, relieved that Hank wasn't angry with him, but his expression shifted again, tightening. There's something else, and I don't know if I should even be the one saying it, but you need to know. Hank's hand paused around the mug. Go on. Derek leaned in slightly. Chloe's been talking about hosting a big Colorado event, a wedding content party, she called it, said it'll be great for her page, for sponsors, for visibility. He swallowed. And she told people they'd be doing it here, at your place. The words slid across the table like ice. Hank blinked, unsure if he heard correctly. Here, in my house. Derek grimaced. Yeah, I didn't think she meant literally, but she did. They were acting like it was already decided. A cold heaviness settled in Hank's stomach, heavier than anything he'd felt since seeing the wedding photos. He set his mug down carefully because his fingers suddenly felt weak. They planned to use his home, his sanctuary, without even asking him, without even telling him. Derek kept talking, voice low, embarrassed on Hank's behalf. Ryan was bragging a bit, saying the house is basically his, that it's just a matter of time. He said it like a joke, but it didn't sound like a joke. Hank didn't respond. He couldn't. For a moment, all he could hear was the rush of his own pulse. Ryan had spoken casually about inheriting the home, as if Hank were already gone, as if the decades Hank spent maintaining every corner didn't matter, as if his life, his presence, were merely a temporary inconvenience. The grief he carried, the grief he had tried to bury with understanding, patience, excuses, shifted. It sharpened, cut cleaner. What had once been sadness began to reshape itself into clarity. Derek fumbled with the edge of his jacket. There's more. Chloe already reached out to a photographer, same one she used for the wedding, asked her to scout the property for lighting and angles. He hesitated. They're treating your home like a backdrop, Hank, like it's theirs. Something inside Hank snapped into focus. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a small, precise click, a hinge settling into place, a truth he could no longer unsee. He stood slowly, steadying himself on the table. Thank you for telling me, Derek, he said quietly. I mean it. I'm glad someone did. Derek rose as well, still looking uneasy. I wasn't sure if I should, but you deserve to know. And Hank, you didn't deserve any of this. Hank forced a tight smile, walked Derek to the door, and thanked him again. When Derek stepped off the porch and started back down the driveway, Hank closed the door softly behind him. He leaned his forehead against the wood for a moment, the quiet of the house settling around him. His heart thudded once, deep and heavy, before settling into something calmer, firmer. He whispered into the stillness, not angry, not emotional, just resolute. No, he said, not anymore. And as the words left his mouth, something shifted in the air around him, subtle but unmistakable, like the moment before a storm when the wind changes direction. Hank sat at the kitchen table long after Derek left, the house unusually still, every tick of the wall clock landing like a reminder of how much time he'd spent waiting, for calls, for apologies, for respect that never came. Eventually he reached for his phone, thumb hovering over Ryan's name. He didn't expect a warm conversation. He didn't expect an explanation. But he needed to hear his son's voice, if only to confirm that Ryan still had one for him. He pressed call. The ring lasted barely 2 seconds before voicemail clicked in, cheerful and impersonal. Hey, it's Ryan, leave a message. Hank's jaw tightened. He stayed silent. He didn't leave a voicemail this time, not because he was angry, he wasn't there yet, but because he finally understood that whatever he said would be dismissed, sidestepped, or ignored. He ended the call and set the phone face down on the table. For a long moment, Hank just sat there. Then something nudged him, an impulse he hadn't felt in years. He opened the drawer by the refrigerator, pulled out an old leather-bound journal, and set it on the table. The last entry was dated more than a decade earlier, written during the months after his wife's death. He turned to a blank page and held the pen awkwardly, like someone handling a forgotten tool. The words came slowly at first, then they came all at once. He wrote about the wedding he didn't know about the silence afterward, about the posts, the assumptions, the entitlement, about the pain that had sat quietly in his chest for years, growing roots he never noticed. But as he kept writing, the emotion shifted. The grief didn't feel as heavy. In its place, clarity took shape, sharp and undeniable. By the time he closed the journal, he felt steadier, like someone who had finally spoken the truth aloud even if no one else heard it. A soft knock pulled him back to the present. Martha stepped in with a grocery bag and that worried look she had perfected after years of mothering the whole neighborhood. Hank told her everything, every word Derek said, every plan Chloe made, every assumption Ryan let stand. When he finished, Martha didn't gasp or scold. She simply reached across the table and touched his hand. "Hank," she said softly, "you deserve respect. Not crumbs of attention tossed your way when it's convenient, not apologies that never come, and certainly not being treated like a doormat in your own home." He nodded, throat tight. "I know, I don't want to act out of anger." "Then don't," she said. "Act out of self-respect." After she left, Hank walked through the quiet house, each room a museum of a life long gone. His footsteps echoed in the hallway, brushing against memories stacked invisibly in corners. The baby gate that used to sit at the stairs, the spot where his wife always set her purse, the wall she painted yellow because she wanted something warm in the mornings. He paused in the living room, hand drifting along the back of the couch. "What would you say?" he whispered to the air, imagining his wife beside him, offering the same gentle honesty she always had. He knew her answer. She wouldn't want him clinging to a house out of obligation or pain. She wouldn't want him to hold onto something that caused him to shrink in his own life. The realization sat heavier than grief, because it was truth, not loss. That night Hank called Calvin. The conversation was short but decisive. Calvin listened without interrupting, the way only an old friend could. When Hank mentioned the idea of selling the house, Calvin didn't flinch. "I think it's time," Calvin said, "and I know someone who will treat you right. A real estate attorney, Dana Cooper. Sharp as they come, but honest. She'll help you figure out your options without any pressure." Hank stood in the hallway, phone pressed to his ear, staring at the family photos hanging on the wall. Selling the house had never felt like an option before. It had been sacred, untouchable. But now it felt like the first breath after years of holding it in. "Do you want her number?" Calvin asked. Hank hesitated only a second. "Yeah," he said, "I think I do." After they hung up, Hank stared at the digits Calvin sent him. His thumb hovered over the call button, his heartbeat oddly steady. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't spite. It was the first step toward freedom, toward choosing himself for once. He inhaled slowly, feeling something settle inside him. Then he pressed call. Dana Cooper arrived on a clear Tuesday morning, exactly on time, her leather case tucked under one arm and a calm, professional presence that instantly steadied the air around her. Hank met her at the door, suddenly aware of how much the house carried. Memories, dust, echoes, the layered weight of a life lived inside these walls. Dana stepped in with a reassuring smile. "Let's take a look," she said, almost gently, as though she sensed the emotional terrain she was walking into. Hank followed her through the rooms. She took notes quickly, eyes scanning everything with the trained precision of someone who had appraised hundreds of homes. She paused in the living room, admiring the wide windows and original wood floors. "These are in great condition," she murmured. "And the lot size, that alone increases your value." His value. Funny how no one had ever phrased it that way before. They moved through the kitchen, the renovated bathroom Jenna had helped redo one summer, the backyard where Ryan once held birthday parties that seemed to stretch for miles. Dana stepped onto the porch, looking out at the mountain view, and nodded with certainty. When they returned to the kitchen table, she typed a few numbers on her tablet, double-checked them, then turned the screen toward him. "This," she said softly, "is what your home is worth today." Hank stared. The number was higher, far higher than anything he had imagined. His breath paused mid-chest. Are you sure?" It felt surreal, like he was seeing someone else's property appraisal. Dana smiled. "Positive. This area has appreciated faster than you realize. Your home isn't just sentimental, it's high value." High value. The words echoed in his mind, rearranging something deep inside him. Ryan had spoken of the house like a future entitlement. Chloe had treated it like a prop waiting for its new owners. But this valuation, made one truth unavoidable. Selling the house wouldn't just give him a fresh start. It would erase Ryan's assumed claim overnight. And for the first time, he didn't feel guilty for thinking it. He felt steady. That afternoon, Jenna stopped by. She listened as he told her everything, Dana's walkthrough, the appraisal, the potential sale. She didn't look angry or surprised. She looked proud. "Dad, this is good," she said, squeezing his shoulder. "Really good, but you know Ryan's not going to take this well." He nodded. "I know." "He'll call you selfish," she added. "Or emotional, but you're not. You're choosing what's best for you." Her voice softened. "I'm with you, whatever comes next." Her words didn't erase the ache, but they gave him a spine where guilt once lived. After she left, Hank moved slowly through the house, gathering items he knew he didn't want to bring with him. Old holiday decorations, boxes of tools he hadn't touched in years, clothes he kept because they reminded him of a life he no longer fit into. He packed them neatly into donation bags, and with each load he carried to the car, he felt something lighter inside him, like he was detaching from the emotional weight he had allowed to accumulate. This wasn't running away. This was release. The next morning, Dana returned with paperwork and a clear outline of the legal process. She spoke plainly, explaining timelines, disclosures, protections, and next steps. Hank listened carefully, absorbing every word, no longer allowing decisions to be made around him or through him. He asked questions. He clarified points. He engaged. It felt unfamiliar but empowering, like stepping into a role he had forgotten he was allowed to play. "Once you sign these initial documents," Dana explained, "we can move forward with prepping the listing. Nothing final yet, but this puts things officially in motion." Hank looked down at the papers, 20 pages neatly stacked, legal language, signatures waiting. In the quiet of the kitchen, he thought of his wife, how she always encouraged him to choose happiness, even when he didn't believe he deserved it. He thought of Ryan and Chloe, their assumptions, their entitlement. And he thought of himself, tired, overlooked, shrinking in his own home. He lifted the pen. The first signature felt like stepping onto solid ground after years of drifting. The second felt like breath returning to lungs that had been half-filled for too long. When he finished signing the last page, he set the pen down with a steady hand. Dana smiled. "That's it, Hank. The hardest part is behind you." He nodded, not trusting his voice. She gathered the papers, gave him one last reassuring look, and left. That night he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, waiting for the familiar knot of worry to tighten in his chest. But it didn't. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, his mind wasn't spinning. His body wasn't bracing. He closed his eyes, and sleep came easily, quietly, like a long-lost friend finally returning home. And when morning arrived, he woke not to heaviness, but to calm. A calm that felt like the beginning of something he hadn't felt in years. A life that finally belonged to him. Ryan called on a Wednesday afternoon. The kind of day that felt ordinary in every way except for the name glowing on Hank's phone screen. Hank had just finished rinsing paintbrushes from touching up the hallway trim, a small project meant to keep his hands busy while the listing process slowly prepared to unfold. When the phone rang, he stared at it for a moment, feeling no jolt of excitement, no flutter of hope, just a quiet steadiness. He answered on the third ring. "Hey, Dad," Ryan's voice came through bright, breezy, almost cheerful, as if nothing had happened, as if they hadn't spoken through a one-way silence. "For nearly 3 weeks. We just got back. Man, the honeymoon was incredible." Hank let the warmth wash over him without absorbing it. "That's so," he replied, tone calm but cool. "Oh yeah," Ryan continued, oblivious. "Chloe found this resort, private villas, insane food, whole deal. We're exhausted though. Travel days kill me." He laughed softly, waiting for Hank to join in. Hank didn't. "That's nice," Hank said simply. Ryan stumbled for half a second, thrown off by the shortness of the answer, but he recovered quickly, shifting gears. "Anyway, I figured I'd check in, see how things are going. Everything good on your end?" "Fine," Hank said. Just that one word. Ryan paused again, and this time Hank could almost hear him recalibrating. But the casual charm returned quickly, as if he couldn't imagine his father being upset for more than a moment. "Great, great. So listen, we were talking on the flight back, and we really want to start planning that Colorado reception. You know, something small but elegant, rustic modern vibes. Chloe's got all these ideas." Hank let him talk. He didn't interrupt, didn't correct him, didn't warn him. He simply listened, leaning back in his chair, letting the sound of Ryan's excited rambling wash over him like distant noise. "We want to make it special," Ryan continued. "Like a celebration with people who couldn't make the wedding, and we figured it makes total sense to do it in Colorado. I mean, the backyard is perfect. Everyone always loved the house. It's basically meant for events." Hank's jaw tightened, but not from hurt, from clarity, from control. He murmured, noncommittal. If Ryan sensed the tightness, he ignored it. "We're thinking late fall, maybe early winter. Weather can be tricky, but Chloe already has a vision board going. She wants string lights across the yard, maybe a fire pit lounge setup. Oh, and she found this caterer who specializes in mountain chic menus." Hank allowed the silence to stretch long enough for Ryan to notice. "Dad," Ryan said, uncertain now, "you still there?" "I'm here." Ryan laughed awkwardly. "Okay, just making sure you're quiet today." "Just listening." "Right, well, anyway, the whole thing will be beautiful. And honestly, it'll be nice to celebrate with you. Make up for missing the wedding." The words should have hurt. They didn't, not anymore. Before Hank could respond, he heard Chloe's voice in the background. "Is that your dad? Put me on." A moment later, her bright, polished tone filled the line. "Hi Hank, hope you're doing well. We're so excited to see you soon. We were actually wondering, would it be okay if we used your backyard sometime in the next few weeks, just to get some preliminary photos done, lighting checks, that sort of thing." She said it like someone asking to borrow a sweater, casual, effortless, entitled. Hank felt the calm settle deeper. He didn't raise his voice, didn't show irritation. He simply answered with a softness that surprised even him. "We'll see." Chloe hesitated. "We'll see." "That's right," Hank said gently. "Oh, okay, sure, just keep us posted." Her voice carried the first crack of uncertainty Hank had ever heard from her. Then she quickly passed the phone back. Ryan tried to recover the tone. "So, yeah, think about it. And hey, we should grab dinner soon. I want to show you some honeymoon photos." "Maybe," Hank replied. "Maybe." "We'll see," Hank repeated, steady and unwavering. The line went quiet. This time the silence was Ryan's. "Well, okay then," he said finally, his voice thinner now. "Talk soon, Dad." "Goodbye, son." Hank hung up first. He set the phone down slowly, the kitchen suddenly feeling lighter, like the house exhaled with him. He felt no guilt for the clipped responses, no anxiety about what Ryan or Chloe thought. Instead, a quiet satisfaction pulsed through him. Not revenge, not triumph, but balance. For the first time in a long while, the power between them had shifted. He stood by the window, watching sunlight spill across the yard they took for granted, the yard they believed they owned. They didn't know what was coming yet. But they would. Very soon. Dana moved efficiently, almost invisibly in the days that followed. She understood Hank's request for discretion, not secrecy but privacy, and honored it with quiet professionalism. No public announcements, no loud yard signs, no social media blasts. She listed the house through her private network first, reaching out only to serious buyers who valued Colorado homes with character, not influencers looking for backdrops. And within 48 hours, the offers began to arrive. Hank sat at the dining table, staring at the emails stacking one by one in his inbox. Numbers, names, families, investors, every message felt surreal. The house he'd lived in for decades, the house he'd repaired and repainted and rebuilt piece by piece, was suddenly in demand. His hands trembled slightly as he scrolled, but not from fear. From pause. Ability. He felt nervous, yes. Selling a home wasn't small. It was uprooting a life. But beneath that nervousness lived something steadier, confidence. A sense that he was stepping into a new chapter instead of being dragged along by someone else's expectations. Martha and Jenna came over that evening with takeout from Hank's favorite diner. They filled the kitchen with warmth, with chatter, with a kind of protective excitement that wrapped around him like a blanket. "To new beginnings," Jenna said, raising her glass of iced tea. Martha added with her signature blunt cheerfulness. "And to Hank finally living for himself, not for anyone else's Instagram." They all laughed, and for the first time in a long while Hank's laugh didn't feel forced. As they ate, Martha nudged him gently. "You made the right choice," she said. "You're not running away, you're walking towards something." He nodded, letting the reassurance settle in a place that had been hollow for months. Later, after the dishes were cleared and the house grew quiet again, Hank stepped onto the porch for some air. The summer evening stretched soft across the neighborhood, the kind of peaceful dusk that made the mountains glow faintly pink. As he stood there, a neighbor walking her dog paused at the edge of the driveway. "Evening, Hank," she called. Then her eyes softened with curiosity. "I heard a rumor your house is for sale." There it was, the moment he'd quietly dreaded. The moment the decision became public. He took a breath, steady, grounded. "It's time," he said simply. No excuses, no explanations, just truth. The neighbor smiled kindly. "Well, I hope it brings you something good." After she left, Hank stepped back inside and walked to the hallway closet he had ignored for years. Most of his wife's belongings had remained untouched out of reverence. Her coats, her old scarves, the box of letters she kept tied with twine. Tonight, gently, he opened the closet and began the slow work of sorting through the final pieces of her life. He laid her scarves on the bed, smoothing each one carefully. Some smelled faintly of her perfume, a soft floral scent that struck him like a memory unfolding in midair. Tears gathered, warm and unhidden, but they didn't feel like the crushing tears of grief. They felt like release, like honoring her, not clinging to her. He kept the letters, of course, and her favorite coat, but the rest, he folded lovingly and placed into boxes for donation. When he carried those boxes to the truck, a strange lightness followed him out the front door. The burden he had carried was not in the items. It was in the fear that letting go meant forgetting. But as he closed the truck bed, he knew the truth. She lived in the love he still carried, not in the things she left behind. By the time he returned to the backyard, the sun had dipped low, casting long streaks of gold across the grass. The yard glowed, the kind of glow that made everything feel softer, warmer, like a farewell whispered gently instead of ripped away. He stood there for a long moment, taking it all in. Ryan once imagined this yard as the perfect place for his reception. But Hank no longer saw the space as something Ryan was owed. This sunset wasn't for Ryan anymore. It was for Hank's future. He imagined mornings without tension, evenings without waiting for a call that might never come. A new home with open windows and open space, somewhere he wasn't haunted by expectations or old guilt, somewhere he could breathe. The next morning, Dana emailed with the updated list of offers, 9 in total now, each higher than the last. One stood out from the rest, a young couple with 2 toddlers who had written a heartfelt note about hoping to raise their children in a home with character, stability, and a real backyard. They weren't influencers or investors. They weren't looking for content. They were looking for a place to build a life. Hank read their letter twice, then a third time. When he called Dana, his voice didn't shake at all. "I want to accept the offer from the young family," he said. "They deserve this place." Dana sounded pleased. "I'll move everything forward." Hank hung up and stood in the quiet kitchen, the weight of the moment settling over him, not heavy but grounding. The decision was made, final. And for the first time in what felt like years, he didn't feel like he was losing something. He felt like he was claiming something. A life that belonged to him and no one else. The call came just after noon, right as Hank was wiping down the kitchen counters, doing small, steady tasks to keep his mind calm through the chaos of finalizing the sale. His phone lit up with Ryan Lawson, Lowe's Angels, CA. The name pulsed on the screen like a warning. He didn't flinch. He didn't hesitate. He simply answered. "Dad," Ryan's voice hit like a shout, sharp and frantic. "What is going on? I just saw a post. Your house is under contract." So that was how he found out, not Thraug. A conversation, not through mutual respect, through a tagged realtor post someone else sent him. Hank took a breath and leaned against the counter. "Yes," he said quietly, "it is." "You're selling the house," Ryan demanded. "The Lawson house, without telling me." Hank kept his tone even, almost gentle. "I didn't think you wanted to be part of this house anymore." For a moment, the line went dead silent. Then Ryan exploded. "Are you kidding me? Dad, you can't just sell it. We already told people we're having a Colorado reception. We already announced it. Chloe built an entire schedule around it. I told our friends it was happening at the house." His voice cracked, not with sadness, but with outrage, offense at his plans crumbling, not at how deeply he'd hurt the man who raised him. Hank stared out the kitchen window at the backyard, the one that would soon belong to a young family. "Seems like you made those decisions without me," he said. Ryan scoffed, a breathy, disbelieving sound. "Dad, it's my childhood home. Of course I assumed we'd be able to use it." "You assumed," Hank repeated. "It's not just an assumption," Ryan snapped. "It's tradition, family, people expect it. We've already told Chloe's parents, her sponsors, everyone. You can't just pull the rug out from under us like this." Hank felt no urge to apologize. He only felt the strange, grounding calm of a man who had finally stepped into truth. "I'm not pulling out anything," he said. "You planned an entire event on property that isn't yours, and you planned it without ever speaking to me." In the background, he heard a sharper voice. "Give me the phone." A moment later, Chloe was on the line. "Hank," she said, her tone sugary but trembling with contained fury, "I don't understand what's happening right now. We have contracts. We have commitments. We told people this event is happening. Do you realize how you're making us look?" Hank closed his eyes for a moment, not from stress but from disbelief at her audacity. "Chloe," he said slowly, "this is my home. You never asked. You only assumed it was available." "We didn't think we had to ask," she snapped. "Ryan said." "I don't care what Ryan said." Hank's voice stayed steady. "You don't get to make plans with something that doesn't belong to you." There was a shocked silence. Chloe wasn't used to boundaries. She wasn't used to being told no. Then the dam burst. "So that's it," she shrieked. "You're sabotaging your own son's reception. You're ruining months of planning. Do you know how awful this makes you look?" Hank almost laughed, not mocking, not dismissive, just a soft, tired sound of someone who'd finally stopped carrying guilt that was never his. "I'm not worried about how it makes me look," he replied. "I'm worried about how you've treated me like I'm already gone." Ryan grabbed the phone back. "Dad, you can't do this. You can't sell the house." "I already did." "Then undo it." Hank shook his head. "It's under contract, and even if it wasn't, I wouldn't." "You're being irrational," Ryan spat. "Emotional and selfish. You know that, right?" Hank's voice softened even further. "No, son. For the first time in a long time, I'm being honest." Ryan sputtered out of words, out of arguments, out of assumptions to lean on. Chloe's voice shouted something in the background, accusations, disbelief, anger. But Hank no longer felt the old pull to explain himself, to soften edges, to carry blame that wasn't his. "I hope," Hank said quietly, "that someday you'll understand why I had to do this." There was a sharp inhale on the other end. Hurt, indignation, or maybe recognition. But Ryan hung up before Hank could tell which one it was. The call ended. The kitchen fell still again. Hank set the phone on the counter and exhaled, long and slow, like someone sliding out of a weight he'd worn for decades. Something inside him loosened. A knot of guilt that had lived in his chest since his wife died, since he'd tried to parent through grief and fear and endless forgiveness. And now, it was gone. Not diminished. Not eased. Gone. He stood there, the silence deep but not lonely, and felt a shift so profound he almost didn't recognize it. For the first time in years, Hank wasn't the one holding onto the past. He had finally let go. And now the fallout was coming. The fallout arrived fast, louder, messier, and more dramatic than Hank ever could have predicted. By the next morning, his phone was blinking with 3 missed calls and 5 new voicemails, all from Ryan. Hank stared at the screen for a long moment before finally pressing play. "Dad, what are you doing?" Ryan's voice came through sharp, panicked. "This is punishment, that's what this is. You're punishing me for not inviting you. You're trying to make me look bad. You know how this makes us look." Hank deleted the message. Another voicemail. "You didn't even talk to me before signing anything. You're making a terrible mistake. Chloe is furious, her family is confused, and now I have to do damage control because you decided to be impulsive." Delete. A third message, angrier. "I can't believe you do something so spiteful. You're being unreasonable. You're acting out. I thought you were better than this." Hank didn't react. He simply pressed delete again. For the rest of the morning, he left the phone on silent, setting it face down on the counter while he organized documents for closing. Every so often, another voicemail appeared, another accusation, another plea masked as anger. But none of it pulled Hank back into the old pattern of guilt. He was done carrying the weight for everyone else. Later that afternoon, Jenna called, not to scold him but to warn him. "Dad, have you seen Chloe's Instagram?" she asked, voice tense. "No," Hank replied simply. "Well, she's posting these stories. Stuff like toxic family sabotage, and when people can't stand to see you happy. She's letting her followers think you're the villain." Hank closed his eyes briefly, but not from pain, from exhaustion. Exhaustion at how easily people twisted truth when it protected their pride. And Jenna continued, "People are eating it up. Her followers are leaving comments about jealous parents. It's ridiculous." Hank stayed quiet, leaning against the kitchen counter. "Let them talk," he said finally. "I don't need to explain myself to strangers." Jenna exhaled, a frustrated sound. "I already commented," she admitted. "I wasn't going to let them drag you like that." "What did you say?" That she forgot to mention the part where she planned an event at a home that wasn't hers, And that posting vague drama isn't the same as telling the truth. Jenna paused. A bunch of people liked it, and some of her followers started asking questions she clearly didn't want to answer. Hank couldn't help the faint smile tugging at his mouth. "Thank you," he murmured. "You shouldn't have to deal with this nonsense," she said. "They're embarrassed, not wronged." After they hung up, Hank stepped onto the porch, breathing in the warm Colorado afternoon. The mountains in the distance were calm, indifferent to online drama and voicemail meltdowns. He stood there, letting the quiet settle around him like a shield. A few minutes later, Martha appeared at the edge of the walkway, holding a Tupperware container of something warm. She climbed the porch steps with that steady, unflappable stride she had perfected over decades of raising children and surviving more heartbreak than she ever talked about. "Heard you're causing a scandal," she announced dryly. Hank barked a short laugh. "Seems so." She handed him the dish. Chicken casserole, comfort food, and yes, I already saw Chloe's posts. A friend sent them to me because apparently I should know what's being said. Martha rolled her eyes. "Listen to me, Hank. Boundaries are not cruelty. They're clarity. You didn't hurt anyone. You simply stopped letting people take advantage of you." Hank looked down at the dish in his hands, suddenly grateful for something as simple and grounding as homemade food. "Thank you," he said softly. She touched his arm. "You gave that boy decades of love. If he chooses to twist this into betrayal, that's on him, not you." After she left, Hank sat at the kitchen table and found himself breathing easier. Later that evening, Calvin called. His voice, like always, was matter-of-fact and warm. "Saw the online commotion," he said. "Ignore it. This isn't about revenge, Hank. It's about reclaiming your life. Don't let their noise confuse you." "I know," Hank said, and he did deeply. "Closing days coming soon," Calvin reminded him. "Focus on that. Focus on what comes next." And Hank did. He spent the next few hours sorting through paperwork, reviewing the timeline Dana had given him, double-checking dates and confirmation emails. His movements were slow, thoughtful, steady, like a man finally steering the wheel of his own life instead of sitting in the passenger seat. He didn't check social media. He didn't listen to more voicemails. He didn't defend himself or justify or engage. He chose calm. He chose silence. He chose dignity. By the time he shut off the kitchen lights and headed to bed, he felt something settle inside him, a quiet assurance, a centeredness that had been missing for far too long. Yes, Ryan was angry. Yes, Chloe was spiraling online. Yes, the town was buzzing. But for the first time in years, none of it controlled him. He had a closing day to prepare for. A new home waiting. A new beginning already unfolding. And tomorrow he would take on their step forward. Hank started in the attic, where dust floated like faded confetti drifting through slanted beams of morning light. Boxes lined the walls, decades of belongings sealed away in cardboard, each one labeled in his late wife's gentle handwriting. He knelt beside the first box and opened it slowly, like lifting the lid on a time capsule he wasn't sure he was ready to face. Inside were old photo albums, worn at the corners from years of handling. He flipped through them, page after page of moments he had almost forgotten. Jenna in pigtails holding a garden hose twice her size, Ryan sitting on his shoulders at the state fair, his wife beaming in the background of every shot as if her smile held the family together. Sadness rose first, a soft ache. Then pride followed, warm and grounding. The memories were bittersweet but whole, untouched by the chaos of the present. As he sorted through each box, he felt something inside him shift, not grief exactly, but closure. A quiet recognition that every moment they shared had shaped him, shaped his children, shaped the home itself. These memories didn't belong to Ryan's plans or Chloe's curated image or the opinions of strangers online. They belonged to the life Hank built with intention, sacrifice, and love. Jenna arrived mid-morning, letting herself in with the familiarity of someone who had always belonged in this house. "Dad," she called, "where are you?" "In the attic," he answered. She climbed up with a smile already forming, nostalgic, soft, a little teary. Together they opened more boxes, sitting cross-legged on the wooden floorboards, surrounded by remnants of the past. Every item seemed to unlock a story. "Remember this," Jenna laughed, holding up a crayon drawing of a house with crooked windows. "I was convinced the roof needed to be purple." "You were 6, Hank chuckled, "and you insisted the sky had to be orange." She reached into another box and pulled out Ryan's old baseball glove. "He carried this thing everywhere," she said, "even to church that one time." Hank smiled, the memories landing with warmth instead of the sting they used to carry. "He wouldn't let me buy a new one, said this one had magic." Jenna nudged him with her shoulder. "See, we grew up here, we lived here, this place shaped us. Not what Ryan thinks about it, not what Chloe says online, us." Hank took that in, slowly, deeply. She was right. The value of this home wasn't in its potential for receptions or content shoots. It was in these memories. And those memories weren't going anywhere, no matter who owned the property next. They moved to the bedroom next, sorting through drawers filled with time-worn keepsakes. That's when Hank found the small wooden box tucked behind old sweaters. He recognized it instantly, his wife's memory box. He lifted the lid, and inside were letters tied together with a simple piece of twine. He untied them carefully. Her handwriting curled across the pages, familiar and alive. Some letters were written during their early years of marriage, others during difficult seasons, some during her final months when her voice had grown weak but her spirit hadn't. He read one line aloud, his voice catching. "Promise me you'll choose happiness someday, even if it looks different than you imagined." Jenna's hand slipped into his, grounding him. "She'd be proud of you," she whispered. The timing felt almost supernatural, finding the words he needed precisely when he needed them. Hank folded the letters gently, placing them back in the box as if returning something sacred to its place. By late afternoon, the house had transformed. Empty spaces appeared where furniture once stood. Bare walls echoed softly. Rooms felt lighter, quieter, like they were exhaling after decades of holding memories. With the last box sealed, Hank stepped outside for one final walk around the property. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the backyard. He walked the perimeter slowly, past the rose bushes he planted with his wife, past the spot where Jenna learned to ride her bike, past the porch swing where Ryan used to curl up and fall asleep as a toddler. Every step carried its own story. Every corner held a whisper of laughter or loss or something in between. He paused at the center of the yard, letting the nostalgia wash over him one last time. Then he whispered, almost too quietly for the breeze to catch, "Thank you for all of it." He wasn't just saying goodbye to a house. He was saying goodbye to a chapter, one he had lived fully, loved deeply, and was finally ready to close. The morning of the final walkthrough arrived crisp and quiet, the kind of Colorado morning where sunlight felt clean and the air carried a faint chill. Hank stood in the doorway as the young family, the Martins, pulled into the driveway. He watched their 2 little girls tumble out of the backseat, one clutching a stuffed rabbit, the other pointing excitedly at the porch swing as if it were something magical. "Mr. Lawson," the father Evan greeted him with a warm smile. "Thank you again for letting us stop by one last time before closing. We wanted to see it together, you know, as a family." Hank nodded, stepping aside to let them in. "Of course, take all the time you need." The mother, Camille, paused in the entryway, closing her eyes briefly as if to take in the moment. "It already feels like home," she murmured. "Thank you for choosing us." Their gratitude wasn't loud or performative. It was real, quiet, sincere, grounded in something Hank hadn't felt in a long time: respect. The girls darted down the hallway toward what would soon be their bedrooms, their laughter echoing off the now empty walls. Evan wandered into the living room, running his hand over the mantel. "This room, it's got soul. You can feel it." Hank smiled faintly. "A lot of years in here." Camille touched his arm lightly. "We'll take good care of it." He believed her. As he watched the family explore, Hank felt something unexpected stir inside him. Not grief, not loss, but peace. A soft, settling kind of peace. Seeing them move through the space with wonder rather than entitlement made him realize this home wasn't being taken from him. He was passing it forward, to people who would build, not expect, appreciate, not assume. After nearly half an hour, the family gathered by the front door again, the girls tugging at their parents' sleeves. "We can't wait," Evan said. "Thank you truly." Hank shook his hand with a firm, steady grip. "I'm glad it's going to you." Their car pulled away, leaving the driveway quiet, and for the first time the silence didn't ache. But the peace didn't last long. 20 minutes later, Hank's phone buzzed with a message from an unfamiliar number, until he opened it and saw Chloe's profile picture glaring back. "You need to reverse the sale immediately. This is unacceptable. We had plans. You know we needed that house. Fix it." No greeting, no apology, no acknowledgement of ownership, of boundaries, of anything resembling respect, just a command. Another message appeared seconds later. "You're sabotaging us. This is malicious. I'm giving you one chance to make this right." Hank stared at the screen for a beat, then pressed and held her number. "Block. Confirm." Just like that, the noise was gone. He felt lighter. But the quiet didn't last long, not this time either. Not even an hour later, Hank heard tires screech outside. He walked to the front door, half expecting a delivery. Instead, Ryan was storming up the walkway, jaw clenched, hands balled tightly at his sides. Hank opened the door before Ryan could pound on it. "What are you doing?" Ryan snapped, barreling past him into the living room. "You blocked Chloe, you sold the house. Dad, what the hell is wrong with you?" Hank closed the door calmly. "You don't get to speak to me like that." Ryan whipped around. "No, you don't get to treat us like this. You blindsided us. You humiliated us. Chloe's parents think we lied. Our friends are asking questions. This whole thing is a disaster because of you." A bitter laugh almost escaped Hank, but he swallowed it. "A disaster because of me. Ryan, you got married without telling me." Ryan's mouth opened, but no words came out. Hank continued, voice steady. "You stood in front of a crowd of people, strangers to me, and made a lifelong promise, and I found out on Instagram." His tone wasn't angry, it wasn't emotional, it was factual. "You made choices that excluded me from your life, and now I'm making choices that protect mine." "That's not fair," Ryan choked out. "It's the truth," Hank said. Ryan's face twisted, hurt mixed with confusion, pride mixed with something that might have been regret. We thought you'd understand, that you'd support us like always." Hank's brow softened. "I supported you for years, Ryan, even when it cost me pieces of myself." He took a slow breath, meeting his son's eyes. "But you got married without me. I'm moving on without you." The sentence hung in the air, quiet, heavy, final. Ryan stared at him, stunned, speechless for the first time since he'd arrived. He opened his mouth, closed it again, then stepped back, breath unsteady. Without another word, he turned and walked out the door, shoulders tight, steps uneven. Hank didn't call after him. He didn't apologize. He didn't chase. He simply stood in the doorway, the late afternoon light spilling across the empty living room, and felt, for the first time, what it meant to let go without breaking. And as Ryan's car disappeared down the street, Hank knew. The hardest part was over. But the next chapter was still waiting to begin. The closing papers were stacked neatly on the polished conference table, each page marked with small yellow tabs showing where Hank needed to sign. Dana sat beside him, composed and reassuring, while the young couple, the Martins, waited across from him with barely contained excitement. Their daughters colored, quietly in the corner, giggling every so often. Hank picked up the pen. His hand didn't shake, not this time. With each signature, years of weight seemed to slip off his shoulders, grief that had lingered long after his wife's passing, guilt he had carried for Ryan, pressure he had never acknowledged. By the time he reached the final page, a strange stillness had settled in his chest, not empty but open. Dana slid the completed documents into a folder. "And that's it," she said softly. "The house officially transfers today. Congratulations, Hank." Evan and Camille stood, beaming. "Thank you," Camille said. "From the bottom of our hearts, we promise to take care of it." Hank smiled, warm and genuine. "I know you will." When he stepped outside into the sunlight, the air felt new, brighter somehow, sharper, as if he had stepped into a different version of his own life. He walked to his car slowly, savoring the moment. He wasn't going back to the old house. Instead, he drove straight to the real estate office, where the keys to his new home waited. The condo was smaller, but the moment he stepped inside, he felt something lift inside him. Clean lines, fresh paint, huge windows that opened onto sweeping mountain views, peaks dusted with early snow, stretching endlessly, silently, beautifully. It didn't hold memories yet. And maybe that was the point. Jenna arrived an hour later with a trunk full of boxes and a bright smile. "Dad," she gasped, stepping into the living room, "this place is perfect for you." They spent the afternoon setting things up, assembling shelves, arguing playfully over where the couch should sit, hanging a few framed photos. Not many, just enough to honor the past without letting it swallow the present. At one point, Jenna stood by the window, watching the mountains with him. "Mom would have loved this view," she said softly. Hank swallowed, emotion pressing warm behind his ribs. "Yeah," he murmured, "she would have." Jenna squeezed his hand, and for the first time since the wedding revelation, the ache inside him didn't feel like a wound, it felt like remembrance. Loving, gentle, steady. They laughed while unpacking the kitchen, Jenna teasing him about the ancient blender he insisted on bringing, Hank teasing her back about her color-coded spice jars. They cried too, but the tears were different now. Not sharp, not heavy, just honest. By the time evening settled, the condo looked lived in, not perfect, not completely arranged, but real, warm, his. Jenna kissed his cheek before leaving. "I'm proud of you," she whispered, "for choosing yourself." After she left, the quiet didn't feel lonely. It felt peaceful, grounded. Hank made himself a simple dinner, then wandered to the balcony with a mug of tea. The mountains glowed deep gold beneath the setting sun, shadows stretching long and soft across the valleys. A breeze lifted the curtains behind him, carrying the faint scent of pine. He breathed in, deep, slow. The air felt lighter. He felt lighter. That night he lay in his new bed, new sheets, new room, new view, and felt something he hadn't felt in months. Rest. Real rest. The kind that didn't require bracing himself for a call or pleasing someone or holding on to a house that no longer held him. He slept easily. Naturally. With peace. The next morning, a knock sounded at the door. He opened it to find Martha standing there with a Tupperware container and a proud grin. "Housewarming cookies," she announced, marching in like she'd always had a key to the place. "Your new home needed a little sugar." Hank laughed, accepting the container. "You know I'm trying to eat healthier." "Not today," she said, waving a hand dismissively. "This is a celebratory exception." She walked through the condo, nodding as if personally approving every corner. "This suits you," she said finally. "Feels like a place someone starts a new chapter in." Hank leaned against the counter, smiling softly. "That's what it feels like." Martha placed a hand over his. "I'm glad you stopped giving everything away to people who didn't appreciate you." Hank didn't answer. He didn't need to. When she left, he stood at the window once more, watching sunlight rise over the mountains. No guilt tugged at him. No shame. No obligation to repair what someone else broke. Just freedom. Just air. Just a future he was finally ready to step into. He whispered almost to himself, "Here as to new beginnings." And for the first time in a long, long while, it truly felt like one. The meltdown began early on a Tuesday morning, long before Hank had even finished his first cup of coffee. His phone vibrated on the counter, not with calls this time, but with notifications buzzing one after another. Mentions, tags, messages from neighbors and former students. Even Martha sent a single text. "You seeing this?" Hank opened Instagram out of reluctant curiosity. And there she was, Chloe, red-eyed, dramatic lighting, glossy lips trembling for the camera. She'd posted a 5-minute rant to her story, captioned with shaking fist emojis and a bold headline. "Betrayed by family tradition's broken heart." Hank pressed play. Chloe sniffled exaggeratedly. "I'm shaking," she began, voice wavering with theatrical emotion. "After everything we planned, after the wedding, after the love, to have a family member, yes, family, undermine us like this. It's heartbreaking." She dabbed at an imaginary tear. This house, Ryan's childhood home, was supposed to be part of our story, part of our journey, our brand as a couple, and someone, she didn't name Hank, but she didn't have to, decided to throw it all away. For what? Spite. Hank exhaled, shaking his head. He wasn't surprised, only tired. Then came the dagger. Some people don't understand loyalty. They don't understand tradition. They don't value the next generation. They sabotage it. They ruin it. The story ended with Chloe dramatically placing a hand on her chest. "Pray for us," she whispered. Hank set the phone down. If this was her idea of a crisis, she'd never seen a real one. But the internet had. Minutes later, comments began flooding her page, hundreds, then thousands. At first, they were supportive, loyal fans offering sympathy. But the tone shifted quickly when one sharp-eyed follower exposed a detail Chloe clearly hadn't expected anyone to remember. A screenshot appeared in Hank's messages. A follower had reposted one of Chloe's older videos with a bold circle around a specific line. "Can't wait to use Hank's house for upcoming brand deals and seasonal shoots. That backyard is practically content gold." Someone added the caption. So this was about tradition, or monetizing someone else's property. The internet pounced. Comment after comment dismantled her narrative. "Using your father-in-law's house for brands. Yikes. Maybe ask before planning your influencer empire on someone else's home." Sounds entitled. This is why older generations don't trust younger couples. Even Chloe's loyal followers backed away, some quietly, others loudly. The sympathy had flipped. By noon, the meltdown turned into a public relations disaster. Ryan hadn't called yet, but when he finally did, the tone was nothing like the rage Hank had heard before. His voice was broken. Soft. Unsteady. "Dad," he said, barely above a whisper, "can you talk?" Hank sat down by the window, looking at the mountains outside. "I'm listening." There was a shaky breath on the other end. "Everything is falling apart," Ryan said. "Chloe S. She's losing it. The comments, the messages, the DMs, people are attacking us. Her sponsors are asking questions. She's blaming me for not controlling the narrative. She said I failed her." Hank closed his eyes for a brief moment. Not from sympathy, from recognition. Ryan wasn't talking about his marriage breaking because of a house sale. It was breaking because the truth had finally clashed with the illusion Chloe lived in. "She's saying you betrayed us," Ryan continued. "That I didn't protect her, that I let this spiral. And Dad, I don't know what to do. I don't know how we got here." Hank waited a beat before speaking. "Son," he he said quietly. I'm sorry you're hurting, truly, but I'm not apologizing for my decision. Ryan didn't argue. That alone told Hank how fragile the situation had become. You sold the house, Ryan whispered, and now I'm losing everything. The house, her trust, your respect. Hank didn't sugarcoat it. Ryan, you didn't lose anything today that you didn't set in motion yourself. Silence. Not offended silence. Realization. Before Ryan could respond, another call came through, this time from an unknown number. Hank almost ignored it, but something told him to pick up. It was Chloe. Her voice was ice. Hank Lawson, this is your last warning. Reverse the sale or we're pursuing legal action for emotional damages and interference with marital commitments. Hank almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so far outside the realm of reason that only exhaustion kept him from reacting. I don't respond to threats, he said, and I don't owe you my home. You'll regret this, she snapped. Hank didn't reply, he simply pressed a button. Call ended, block number. 2 minutes later, Dana called him. Hank, she said, voice calm, I received an email from someone named Chloe, very dramatic, something about ruined livelihoods and legal warfare. I responded with one line. Hank raised an eyebrow. What line? That she has no legal standing and should cease contact immediately or face consequences herself. He exhaled, thank you. I've seen this kind of tantrum before, Dana added. It burns out fast. When Hank hung up, he stood in the quiet of his new condo, hands resting on the counter. No trembling, no second-guessing, just peace. Ryan's earlier words replayed in his mind. I'm losing your respect. And Hank realized something important. Ryan didn't lose it today. He lost it over time. Through choices, through silence, through assumptions. Through the moment he let someone else dictate the value of his father. Hank stared out at the mountains, feeling the weight settle into clarity. His son hadn't lost the house. He'd lost the man who once bent over backwards to keep the peace. Because Hank was done bending. And for the first time, Ryan would have to face the reality he'd created. Alone. The silence arrived not as a sudden break but as a slow unraveling. A day without a call from Ryan became 2. 2 became 7. 7 became 15. Soon, nearly a month had passed with no messages, no apologies, no attempts at repair, only absence. A silence thick enough to feel, but not sharp enough to wound. In the early days, Hank caught himself glancing at his phone more often than he wanted to admit. Not because he expected Ryan to understand overnight, but because fatherhood had conditioned him into hoping, even when hope didn't make sense. He'd listen to the soft buzz of a new notification, only to find it was a bank alert, a weather update, a delivery notice. Never Ryan. But as the weeks stretched on, those glances became fewer. The ache dulled. The disappointment faded. The silence stopped feeling like punishment and started feeling like space. Hank filled that space deliberately. It began with hiking, something he'd always talked about but never fully committed to. Colorado mornings felt different when he wasn't carrying decades of obligation on his back. The trails behind his condo wound deep into pine forests, cool and quiet, the kind of quiet that soothed rather than stung. He'd walk slowly at first, breathing in crisp air, taking in the soft crunch of gravel under his boots. Each step felt like reclaiming a part of himself he'd forgotten, steady, grounded, capable. On the second week of silence, Hank signed up for a volunteer shift at the local library. He shelved books, organized returns, answered simple questions from retirees and young parents. The work wasn't heavy, but it was meaningful. People thanked him, smiled at him, saw him. One afternoon, a woman in her 70s patted his arm and said, "You make this place feel alive." Hank carried that compliment with him for days. In the third week, he joined a beginner gardening class at the community center. He didn't know a thing about soil pH or pruning cycles, but he liked the way learning something new stretched his mind. He liked the dirt under his nails. He liked the easy camaraderie with people who had no idea who Ryan was and didn't care. They talked about tomatoes, not family drama, about weather patterns, not betrayal, about growth, actual growth, measured in inches rather than wounds. Jenna visited often, always with bags of groceries she insisted were extras, even though Hank knew she bought them for him. They cooked dinner together, simple meals that filled the condo with warmth. She teased him about the gardening class, but her eyes shone with pride. "You're different these days," she said one evening as they ate pasta by the window. "Lighter." Hank smiled, stirring his fork through the noodles. "Feels like I'm finally breathing my own air." "You should enjoy it," Jenna said. "No guilt, no apologies, just live." He nodded, letting her words sink in. Freedom wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself. It arrived quietly, like a soft breeze slipping through an open window. As the days drifted on, Hank found himself reflecting more, not on the house or the drama, but on the years that came before, on how deeply his identity had wrapped itself around being a father. Every decision, every sacrifice, every compromise had been shaped by the hope of staying connected to his children. Even after his wife passed, fatherhood had become his anchor, his purpose, his way of staying useful in a world that suddenly felt too large. But now, sitting alone on his balcony with the mountains glowing gold in the distance, he realized something he'd never allowed himself to see. He could be more than someone's dad. He could be a man with a life of his own, carved by choice rather than obligation. One morning, Hank found a thick stack of envelopes in his mailbox, handwritten, stamped, some decorated with stickers. When he opened the first one, he froze. It was from a former student, then another, and another. Dozens of letters poured out onto his kitchen table. They weren't about the house, or Ryan, or Chloe's meltdown. They were about him. Students he'd taught 25, 30 years ago wrote about how he'd changed their lives, how his encouragement had kept them in school, how his fairness earned their respect, how his kindness had shaped them. One letter read, "I hope retirement is treating you well, Mr. Lawson. You deserve peace." Another said, "You were the reason I didn't quit. I hope this chapter brings you joy." Hank's chest tightened, not with sadness but with gratitude. These voices came from the long past, reaching into the present to remind him that he mattered independent of any title, any house, any strained relationship. He stacked the letters carefully, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with nostalgia and everything to do with validation. He had lived a good life. He had done good work. He didn't need approval from a son who couldn't see that. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, something inside him healed. Not all at once, not dramatically, just a quiet stitching together of parts that had been frayed too long. By the time the 6th week of silence arrived, Hank no longer felt any urge to look at his phone for missed calls. He no longer wondered what Ryan was thinking or planning or blaming. He no longer carried the weight of waiting. The silence wasn't a wound anymore. It was just silence. A fact. A reality. An empty space that no longer needed filling. And in that space, Hank discovered something he hadn't felt in years. Peace, not because everything was fixed, but because he no longer needed it to be. It happened on a quiet Saturday morning, the kind where the mountains looked almost painted, soft blue, dusted with pale sunlight. Hank was watering the small potted herbs on his balcony when a shadow moved in the corner of his vision. He turned, expecting maybe a neighbor or a delivery driver. Instead, Ryan stood at the base of the stairs, leading up to the condo. Hank froze. Ryan looked different, not the polished, curated version from social media. His eyes were ringed with exhaustion, his posture slumped. His clothes looked slept in. He held no phone, no props, no shield. Just himself. "Dad," Ryan said softly, Can we talk? Emotion rose in Hank's chest, but not the kind that made him unsteady. More like a quiet acknowledgement of something inevitable. He nodded once and stepped aside, letting Ryan climb the stairs. Inside, Ryan hovered near the entryway as if unsure he had the right to sit. Hank motioned to the couch. "You can sit," he said. Ryan lowered himself slowly, elbows on his knees. He stared at the floor, breathing unevenly. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Ryan looked up. "I know I should have called," he said. "I know it's been too long." Hank leaned against the counter. "Yes." The word wasn't sharp, it was simply true. Ryan winced. "I didn't come here to fight," he swallowed hard. "I came because things are bad, and I don't mean the internet stuff. I mean with us, with me." He paused, searching for words that didn't come easily. "I didn't realize how many people the wedding decision hurt. Not just you, not just Jenna. Even Chloe's family questioned it. Friends kept asking why you weren't there." His voice grew quieter. "And I didn't have a good answer because there wasn't one." The condo settled into a stillness, so deep it felt fragile. Hank crossed his arms loosely. "Why didn't you tell me you were getting married, Ryan?" Ryan's shoulders tensed. "I was scared." "Of what?" He rubbed at his temples. "Of you not liking her, of you thinking she was too much, too different. I didn't want judgment on day one." He shook his head, letting out a breath that sounded years old. "She pushed for a small wedding, it spiraled, and I just didn't stop it. I told myself you'd understand." He met Hank's gaze, shame flickering behind his eyes. "That was wrong, really wrong." Hank didn't soften, he didn't harden either, he just listened, calmly, fully. Ryan continued. "I wasn't trying to erase you, I wasn't trying to replace you, I just handled everything terribly." A humorless chuckle escaped him. "You always said I shut down when I'm overwhelmed. Turns out I still do." He looked around the condo, taking in the newness of it. "This place suits you," he said quietly. I'm glad you found something for yourself." Hank nodded but said nothing. Ryan's voice cracked. "I know I can't fix what's broken in one conversation. I know it might take a long time, but I'm sorry, Dad." He forced the words out like they were caught in his throat. "I'm sorry for hurting you. I'm sorry for assuming you'd always be there waiting. And I'm sorry I let my fear make decisions that should have been made with love, not avoidance." Hank let the apology settle. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't polished, but it was real. And sincerity, raw, unedited sincerity, had been missing for a very long time. He walked over and sat across from Ryan. "I appreciate the apology," he said, "but I'm not going to pretend everything's okay. You left me out of your wedding. You planned events in my home without asking. You let Chloe disrespect me online. Those choices have consequences." Ryan nodded, eyes wet but steady. "I know, and I'm not asking for forgiveness tonight. I'm asking for a chance to do better." Hank studied him, really studied him. The exhaustion, the regret. The young man who'd made mistakes not out of cruelty but out of fear, pride, and immaturity. He didn't excuse any of it, but he understood it more now than he had before. "You hurt me," Hank said, "deeply." "I know," Ryan whispered. But Hank continued, voice softening without losing its firmness. "I'm not closing the door. Not if you're willing to do the work." Ryan blinked, surprised. "Really? Really?" Something fragile, something like hope, flickered across Ryan's face. He nodded, wiping his eyes quickly. "I want to try, I really do." Hank exhaled, tension slowly unwinding from his chest. "Then we take it one step at a time." Ryan stood, uncertain for a moment, then moved toward the door. Before leaving, he paused. "Thank you," he murmured, "for not giving up on me completely." Hank offered a single nod, not forgiveness, not yet, but a beginning. When the door closed behind Ryan, the condo felt different, not heavier, not lighter, but shifted, rebalanced. A wound acknowledged, not ignored. A path opened, not guaranteed. Hank walked to the balcony, watching his son's figure shrink down the walkway, shoulders slouched but steps slower, more grounded. Healing had not arrived. But the possibility had. And possibility, Hank realized, was its own kind of quiet miracle. The week before Thanksgiving arrived with a brightness Hank hadn't felt in years. The air held that familiar November crispness, but something inside him felt different, lighter, clearer, steadier. For the first time since moving into the condo, he pulled out his small box of holiday decorations. A ceramic pumpkin centerpiece, a simple wreath, a table runner his wife had sewn decades ago. He laid everything out without pressure, without expectation. Just quiet appreciation. Jenna helped plan the dinner, insisting they keep it small and simple. "Just people who love you," she said, tapping the grocery list on her phone. They decided on a modest menu: roasted chicken instead of turkey, mashed potatoes, a salad Hank could actually finish preparing without burning something. Martha insisted on bringing her famous cornbread. Calvin volunteered to pick up pies from a bakery in town. No drama, no scrutiny, no obligations pressed onto Hank's shoulders. On Thanksgiving afternoon, the condo filled slowly with the sounds of soft laughter, clinking dishes, and the gentle hum of friendship, real friendship. Martha bustled into the kitchen first, cheeks rosy from the cold. "I brought extra cornbread," she announced, shoving a warm basket into Hank's hands. "Don't pretend you won't want leftovers." Calvin arrived next, balancing two pies and complaining about the holiday traffic. "People lose their minds over mashed potatoes," he muttered, though his smile betrayed his amusement. Jenna came last, arms full of flowers and a bottle of sparkling cider. She kissed her father's cheek, stepped back and looked around the condo. "Dad," she said softly, "this feels good." He nodded. "It does." They ate early, gathered around the small dining table decorated with the old runner. The food wasn't extravagant, but it didn't need to be. Conversation flowed easily, stories, memories, gentle teasing. Hank watched them all for a moment, letting the warmth of the scene sink deep into his chest. There were no expectations here, no tension, no waiting for someone to explode, no quiet resentment simmering beneath smiles. For the first time in years, Thanksgiving felt peaceful. Not obligatory, not fragile, just peaceful. He hadn't realized how much he'd missed that feeling. After the dishes were cleared and dessert served, Hank slipped away to the balcony for a breath of cool air. The mountains glowed under the late afternoon sun, long shadows stretching across the valley, and the stillness wrapped around him like a soft blanket. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Ryan. Hank stared at the screen for a moment before opening it. "Hey Dad, I hope you're having a good Thanksgiving. I know things are still complicated. I'm working on myself. I wanted to ask if maybe I could join a holiday dinner next time, if you're okay with that. No demands. No guilt-laden messages. Just a tentative step, a request instead of an assumption." Hank looked out at the mountains again, letting the quiet settle around him. He didn't feel anger. He didn't feel hurt. What filled him was something gentler, cautious hope wrapped in boundaries he had finally learned how to hold. He typed slowly. "We'll see." Not a promise, not a rejection. A door opened just a crack, enough for honesty, not enough for old patterns to slip back unnoticed. When he returned inside, Martha was lecturing Calvin about the proper way to cut pie, and Jenna was laughing so hard she had to lean against the counter. Hank watched them for a moment, feeling something warm rise in his chest. Gratitude. Not the kind people forced out during holiday toasts, but real gratitude. Gratitude for chosen family, for the people who showed up without expectation, for the quiet joy of a room full of voices that didn't demand anything from him. He sat down beside Jenna as she handed him a slice of pie. "What were you doing out there?" she asked. "Just thinking," he said with a small smile, "about how lucky I am." She nudged him gently. "You deserve this, Dad." The evening wound down slowly with hugs at the door, leftover containers stacked carefully on the counter, and promises to see each other soon. When last guest left and the condo fell into gentle silence, Hank walked through each room, turning off lights one by one. The past no longer pressed in on him. It no longer dictated his choices or pulled at his conscience. It simply existed, part of him but not consuming him. He stood by the window one last time before heading to bed, watching the mountains fade into dusk. A calm, steady breath left his chest. This Thanksgiving wasn't loud or extravagant, but it was healing, honest, his, and for the first time, that was more than enough. The rebuilding didn't happen with a grand gesture or a dramatic apology. It didn't arrive all at once like a sudden sunrise. It came in small, careful moments, quiet steps taken over weeks, each one gentle enough not to disturb the fragile ground beneath them. Ryan's first visit after Thanksgiving was brief. A simple knock on the door, a hesitant smile, a cup of coffee placed awkwardly on Hank's counter as if offering peace in paper form. He didn't linger. He didn't over-explain. He simply asked how Hank was doing, listened, and then left with a promise to stop by again. And he did. Not perfectly, not consistently, but enough. Some days he'd show up with groceries, claiming he bought too much. Other days he'd drop by after work, settling into the armchair across from Hank as if trying to remember how to be part of his father's world. Hank didn't make it easy, but he didn't make it hard either. Their conversation stayed neutral: weather, work, the condo building's bizarrely loud elevator. They didn't touch the fault lines yet. They didn't dig into blame or repair old wounds. It was too soon for that. And Hank knew rushing the process would only send Ryan running back into old patterns. Instead, Hank kept his tone steady, open but measured. One afternoon, Jenna stopped by while Ryan was visiting. She observed their interaction quietly, like someone assessing a fragile ecosystem. After Ryan left, she lingered by the door. "He's trying," she said softly. "Not perfectly, but he's trying." Hank nodded, wiping down the counter. "I see that. Do you trust it?" He paused, thinking. "Not fully, not yet, but I trust the effort." Jenna smiled, a small, cautious smile. "That's enough for now." Over the next several weeks, a rhythm formed naturally. Hank noticed Ryan no longer came empty-handed, not with gifts, but with presence. He'd sit longer, ask deeper questions, share things he used to keep guarded. Occasionally, he'd join Hank on his morning walks, the two moving silently through the crisp mountain air until conversation arrived on its own. One morning during a walk, Ryan broke the quiet. "I took you for granted," he said suddenly. Hank slowed, not stopped, just slowed. "How so?" Ryan kicked a pinecone down the trail, eyes on the dirt. "I assumed you'd always be there, that no matter what choices I made, you'd stay put, like the house, like stability I didn't have to earn." He exhaled shakily. "And when you finally set boundaries, it was like losing gravity." Hank let the words hang in the air, the pine trees towering above them like silent witnesses. "Respect," Hank said finally, "is the foundation of any relationship, not assumption, not habit." He glanced at Ryan. "You didn't lose me because you made mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. You pushed me away because you acted like my role in your life didn't require effort." Ryan nodded slowly. "I know that now." Then quieter, "I'm sorry." Hank didn't rush to fill the silence with forgiveness. He simply nodded back. "Thank you for saying that." And somehow that small exchange shifted the air between them. Not a leap, just a step. They began meeting for coffee every Sunday morning. Sometimes they spoke for an hour. Sometimes they sat in comfortable quiet, steam rising between them, the city waking below the mountains. Other days they hiked short trails, Ryan asking about Hank's gardening class or the latest book he was reading. Hank, in turn, asked about Ryan's work, not to pry but to understand, really understand, the man his son had become. There were awkward moments, too, times when old tensions resurfaced, when Ryan apologized too quickly or Hank pulled back too abruptly, but each time they navigated it with more care than before, slowly, deliberately. Jenna noticed the difference immediately. "You too sound," she tilted her head, thinking intentional. Hank chuckled, "We're learning." She grinned. "Look at you, building a healthy relationship in your 70s. "It's never too late," he said. By early spring, the connection between father and son felt different, lighter but stronger, like two people choosing each other instead of simply existing out of obligation. The house was gone. The old patterns had cracked, and underneath it all, something new had begun to grow. One Sunday afternoon, Ryan stood to leave after their coffee and paused by the door. "Dad." "Yeah." Ryan met his eyes. "Thanks for giving me another chance." "See." Hank nodded, not with the old automatic acceptance but with earned warmth. "We're getting there, step by step." Ryan smiled, real, unguarded, and walked out into the bright spring sun. Hank watched him go, a quiet satisfaction settling in his chest. Not because everything was fixed. Not because the past was forgotten. But because, for the first time in years, their relationship wasn't built on duty. It was built on choice. 1 year later, the world looked different, quieter, clearer, and far more spacious than Hank ever imagined it could be. He sat on his condo balcony that evening, a mug of warm tea in hand, watching the mountains shift from late afternoon gold to deep violet. The air carried the faint scent of pine and the soft hum of spring settling into summer. It was peaceful in a way his old house hadn't been in years. This balcony had become his favorite place, his thinking place, his healing place. Here the past loosened its grip. Here he'd rebuilt himself piece by piece. Here he finally felt like a man living his own life, not someone holding his breath for others. His phone buzzed beside him on the small table. He picked it up, expecting a message from Jenna about dinner later, but the screen showed a different name. "Ryan." Hank paused for half a second, then answered, "Hey, son." Ryan's voice held a note Hank hadn't heard since his son was a teenager, excitement but grounded, genuine. "Dad, I wanted to tell you something. Big news." Hank leaned back in his chair. "I'm listening." "I bought a house," Ryan said, breathless with pride. "Not a big one, not fancy, but it's mine, our first real place. Chloe and I have been saving all year. We did it without loans from her parents or expecting anything from you. We earned it." For a moment, Hank closed his eyes. Not because the news overwhelmed him, but because it filled him with something unexpectedly warm. Relief, pride, recognition of how far they'd both come. "That's wonderful, Ryan," he said, his voice steady. "Congratulations, I mean that." "You helped," Ryan replied quietly. "Not with money, with everything else, with boundaries, with honesty." There was a pause. "You taught me that nothing worth having should be expected. It should be earned." Hank swallowed gently. "I'm proud of you, son." "Thanks, Dad." Ryan hesitated, then added, "I'd love to have you over once we're settled. No pressure, just when you're ready." Hank smiled softly. "We'll make it happen." They talked a few minutes longer, about logistics, moving dates, paint colors, and then hung up with an ease that had taken a year to build. Not rushed, not strained. Just two adults finding their way back to each other without obligation pulling the strings. A few minutes later, another voice floated into the condo. "Dad, you home?" Jenna stepped onto the balcony carrying a foil-covered dish and a grin already forming. "I made roasted vegetables, and don't worry, I didn't burn anything this time." "That's debatable," Hank teased. She rolled her eyes and set the dish on the outdoor table, taking the seat across from him. "You look peaceful," she said, studying him for a moment. "More peaceful than I've ever seen you." Hank glanced out toward the mountains again. "I feel peaceful." They ate together as the sky faded into twilight, city lights blinking on far below. Jenna told him stories about work, funny patients, difficult coworkers, small victories. Hank shared updates about his gardening group, how his basil was thriving but his tomatoes remained stubbornly small. At one point, Jenna touched his hand gently. "This past year, you've changed so much." Hank nodded. "I had to." She studied his face, her eyes softening. "I'm proud of you." He chuckled, mirroring the words he'd just spoken to Ryan. "Seems like we're all growing up a little." Jenna leaned back in her chair, brushing her hair behind her ear. "You know, selling the house scared me at first. Not because I wanted it, but because I thought it would break you. But it didn't. It freed you." Her words settled deep, true, honest, anchoring. Hank thought back on the year behind him, the betrayal, the anger, the messy unraveling of expectations he'd held for decades. The sale, the condo, the silence, the slow rebuilding, the steady return of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Himself. He realized then that losing the house wasn't a loss at all. It was transformation. It stripped away the weight of history, the burden of obligation, the invisible chains of guilt he'd carried alone. It gave him space to grow, room to breathe, permission to choose his own happiness. As the last line of sunlight dipped behind the mountain ridge, the sky turning deep purple, Hank exhaled softly. The kind of exhale that belonged to a man who'd lived through something and come out stronger, clearer on the other side. He stood, walked toward the railing, and let the evening wind brush past him, free and cool. Jenna watched him, smiling. Hank smiled back, eyes reflecting the last glimmer of day. "This time," he whispered to the horizon, "I chose myself."